A history long forgotten will be unearthed. Will their stories endure?
Composing himself, Gidron closed his journal and tucked it away once more. After 3 pats to his chest, he began to pursue the creatures from the trees. He had seen many friends fall to the corruption of this world, but he had been lucky enough to profit from it. His toe pads and mucus-covered arm made him adept at navigating in the canopy. Quietly, he followed the 2 creatures as they shambled along in the ground below. Gidron made a mental note of how awkward their movements were above ground. The carefully crafted tunnels he had found winding throughout the forest implied an elegance that these creatures did not emulate above ground. For hours, he followed the creatures deeper into the forest. The scenery below became shrouded in underbrush. Hills and small gullies formed along the forest floor. Rapid changes in elevation and foliage made it difficult for Gidron to continue after the creatures. When he was sure he would be unable to continue his pursuit, the creatures came upon a ravine in the side of a gargantuan tree. Its root system was a perversion of nature. Each of its roots were as large as the trunks of the surrounding trees. They stretched above the ground occasionally, touching it like waves. The ends of the roots had smaller fibers that spread above the earth. Pulses of the blue magic radiated around those focal points. His curiosity was piqued by the influx of magic in this area. He stretched his arm towards a nearby tree to commune with the magics below. A small voice inside him made him rethink his action.
What if I'm found because I connect to this area? What if the tree somehow consumes my magic due to my proximity?
He concluded that to commune with the tree was far too dangerous without more information. Instead, he pulled out his journal and began to document the scene below. The creatures neared the base of the ravine in the tree. Upon their approach, they began to hiss and snap towards the opening. 4 more of these creatures came out to meet the envoys. Few moments passed as the creatures seemed to communicate. Together, they re-entered the ravine and the forest grew quiet. Gidron decided to quickly find himself an area to camp out. He lowered himself through the canopy to a height that was more conducive to setting up a camp. Having lived in the forest some time, Gidron had become accustomed to remaining a few meters above the underbrush. Gidron made 2 vertical slices in 2 skinny trees where he had decided to make his stay. Using his arm, Gidron pulled long strands of malleable sap and began to fashion a hammock between the trees. The process was strenuous, but Gidron had become accustomed to the task. His bright yellow eye darted around as he worked. He knew better than to assume he was safe anywhere. When his bed had finally been completed, he sighed as he lowered himself into it. He pulled out his journal and began to record what had transpired. He decided to name the creatures Hasar. He noted their movements above ground, the seemingly labored slithering that implied a discomfort that Gidron hoped to utilize. Gidron took note of the biodiversity of the area around him. He had rarely ventured so deep into this part of the forest, but he had familiarized himself with many of its residents. He ran his mucus-covered arm across a vibrant pink flower head. At his touch, the sepal retracted, and the branch had entwined itself around began to glow. Gidron knew that this clever tree lured its food with these false flowers, head traps, and that once touched, the tree became extremely adhesive. He smiled at this marvel of nature, for it fascinated him how the world had evolved through the corruption. With this satisfaction, he fell into a much-needed sleep. A sharp pop erupted from the dark recess of the forest. Gidron bolted up in his hammock, his booklet falling off his chest. He scrambled to try and catch it, but lost his balance in his bed and fell to the ground with a resounding thud. A jolting pain shot through his side. Wheeling around, Gidron realized he had fallen into the jura bush. The bush's leaves were as sharp as knives, and they left tiny little needle spikes in his flesh. He cried out as the pain disoriented him, quickly grabbing up his notebook. Gidron attempted to stabilize himself. He knew that his outburst would not go unnoticed by the predators of the forest.
Stupid, stupid! He thought. I can't believe I could be so careless! I need to move quickly before I can stop this bleeding. Hopefully there's nothing around that can follow my trail before I have a chance to recuperate.
Gidron examined the deep gash in his side.
Even the needles are in me. Ugh. If I don't act fast, the poison will start to erode my stomach.
He pulled out an intricate dagger and sliced through the hammock he had made the previous night. He wrapped some of the sap around his arm and began to commune with the magics of the forest. The poison stopped its colonization of his body as the magic combated it. Gidron released a large puff of smoke again and began to climb back into the canopy.
I know that won't stop the poison, but it buys me time. Please don't let one of the Hussar have heard me.
The forest began to ache as he climbed. The foliage below had grown to life in the absence of wind. Gudrun was confused at the sudden outburst from the forest. Without the nightly routine, the forest rarely came alive in such a dramatic way. However, bizarre the reaction, Gudrun was thankful for the distraction as it allowed him to increase his pace upward. As he reached for his comfortable height, he decided to look below himself. The branches were churning below him, leaves were thrashing through the air like razor blades, and birds were launching through the gaps below. The marvelous cacophony appeared to be random, but the longer Gidron observed, the more certain he became in its impossible, deliberate fluidity. Through the chorus of the forest below him, Gidron could hear the shrill cries of an animal. His eyes widened as he recalled the mien of the beast behind those cries. Forest drakes were a fearsome creature that Gidron believed to have been closely related to the drakes before they were corrupted. Their shrieks had the echoing vibrato that exemplified a dragon's roar, but the sound that escaped their lungs started as a deep roar that grew into a high-pitched scream. Their screams would end in rhythmic cry like a raptor. Their elongated bodies could twist with such ease that traversing up trees was an easy task. Their claws were bright red and were used to revert magic that passed through them. Drakes could snake up into the canopy and then launch themselves using their claws at great speeds when a prey had been found. The part that truly terrified Gidron was their heads. Drakes' heads, when still, appeared to be a simple snout, like a lizard's, with large yellow eyes. When a Drek was on the hunt, however, their heads began to twist into a rotation that is so violent, quick, and erratic that it appeared to have multiple heads in rotation. Their mouths became agape, and their red teeth shined bright through the confusion. It was these teeth that first caught Gidron's eye through the abyss below. He reached out to some dull, brown fruit that was hanging on a tree beside him. He pierced the skin at arm's length with his dagger. He dropped the fruit above the approaching Drek below and cursed as it flew past his snout. Gidron repeated the procedure and missed again. The Drek was bleeding profusely, presumably from the onslaught of the forest, but his hunger was not sated. Gidron knew his blood was like a magnetic drug for the beast below. Gidron grabbed another fruit and drug it across his wounds, covered it in his own blood. He punctured its skin once more and took aim. The shriek of the Drek below was like the hypnotizing clang of two skilled swordsmen locked in combat. Gidron launched her fruit, and the Drek quickly engulfed the bait. Gidron immediately began to whirl around, trying to find somewhere he could jump. A platform made of branches caught his attention, and he lunged forward. The pain in his side erupted as he landed heavily on the platform below. Turning himself over, Gidron watched as the Drek twisted to continue his pursuit. In an instant, the Drek's head ceased its terrifying rotation, and its body became limp. It plummeted through the branches until it got caught in a tenacious, tangled trunk in front of Gidron. Once its body was motionless, echoing cracks deafened the air as roots began to sprout from its body. The roots twisted around the trunk as the Drek was encased inside. Gidron relinquished a slight smile at the sprouting plant before him. The fruit had saved his life yet again, and he did not think it would be the last. He began to connect with the tree, whose limbs had cradled his fall to replenish his magical energy. He knew his time was short before another Drek would be on his trail. He leached from the tree until the poison had been completely eradicated from his body. The needles that had been left in his wound would be dealt with by his immune system in time, but the poison would have slowed his plans for the Hussar. The last selfless act towards the tree was to extract a small amount of sap and wrap his bleeding side. With the poison removed and his bleeding handled, the blender created by the forest had stopped completely, and he was enveloped in silence once more.
Follow our links below for more content, and subscribe.